Now then, I trust that this is clear to you. I tried to make it as simple as I can to show you that these 77s are divided into three parts. 7 sevens or 49 years for the restoration of the city Jerusalem, and following that to the cutting off of Messiah, 62 sevens or 434 years, leaving 1 7 to be fulfilled in the last days, at which time these 6 things will be completed, and everlasting righteousness will be realized for the first time concerning Israel and concerning Jerusalem. Now then, just one more thing about this whole picture. In verse 25, you'll notice the beginning of these 77s of years. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem under the Messiah the Prince, that's when the 77s of years will start. There were 3 commandments to restore and build Jerusalem under the Messiah the Prince. If you read the last chapter of the book of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, the last few verses and the first 3 or 4 verses of the book of Ezra, you will find that Cyrus the Persian gave the first decree to permit the children of Israel to go back from captivity and to rebuild their own temple and their city. That was in direct fulfillment of Isaiah 44, the last verse, and Isaiah 45, the first verse, where God named Cyrus nearly 300 years before the fulfillment of it, long before the man was even born. God saw down through time that there would come a man named Cyrus who would say to the people of Israel, go on back to your land, and who would even say to the temple, it shall be built. So in the first year of Cyrus, that began to happen. Now that was about 2 years after Daniel saw this vision of the 70 weeks in chapter 9. Darius the Persian, you'll notice the first verse of this 9th chapter, it was in the first year of his reign. Darius reigned for 2 years only. Then Cyrus the Persian came on the throne. And in the first year of his reign, that's a little over a year, or somewhere between 1 and 2 years after this vision of chapter 9, God began to fulfill the prophecy of Jeremiah permitting the children of Israel to go back from captivity. Now then, the first commandment then was in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Cyrus reigned for 7 years, then his son Cambyses came to the throne, reigned for 7 years and 6 months, and then came Darius the first to profane history. And then during his reign, in the second year of his reign, some enemies stopped the work on the temple at Jerusalem. They couldn't go on with it. For they stirred up this new king, Darius the first, another Darius other than this one in the 9th chapter here referred to. They stirred him up and told him, why, if you let these people finish this city, why, it'll be a constant source of rebellion against you, and said the best thing you can do is stop this work right now. So he did. He did. He stopped it until 4 years later, and then the work was a commandment went forth to let it go on again. The work continued again, and was finished in the 6th year of his reign. Now there are 2 definite commandments, you see. One in the first year of Cyrus, one in the 4th year of this Darius, the second Darius, not mentioned in your Bible, but in history. Then there was a 3rd decree, mentioned in the 2nd chapter of the book of Nehemiah, about 72 years later, proving that these 49 years could not have started, you see, with the first or the second decrees. For 72 years later, the city was still broken down, the walls and the temple had not been completed. And as you read in your book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah had just contacted a messenger who had come back from Palestine. This messenger told him that the city hadn't been built, the temple hadn't been completed, none of the work was completed, and the people were discouraged, and so Nehemiah went mournfully before the king. Now this was Artaxerxes. 20th year of Artaxerxes, this happened. And now, king wanted to know, what's the matter, Nehemiah? Well, he says, how can I be happy as long as the city of my fathers lieth waste? So he had such favor with the king gave a commandment, take money and take men and go on over there and get the job done. And you'll read from the second to the fourth chapters of the book of Nehemiah how that they did continue the work in troublous times. They had to work with their weapons on their side. Some protected them, watched and had their weapons there, and all the workmen had their weapons ready to go to fight in a minute. Notice, because of the enemies round about. So, it is this third decree that we start these 490 years. Literally 452 BC, as we have marked on the chart, until the cutting off of the Messiah, making altogether 483 years. All right, we have come now for our next lecture on the book of Daniel. Let's turn to the 8th chapter. We've already covered this chapter to some extent, but we want to remind you of a few facts in this chapter before taking up the next chapter, the 11th chapter of of Daniel. In chapter 8, we have seen the prophet predicted things concerning the kingdoms of the Medes and Persians and the kingdom of Greece. He saw a ram pushing westward and northward and southward so that no beast could stand before it. Then he saw an he-goat, which was going westward, or rather eastward, and it touched not the ground as it went. It had a great horn between its eyes. And the he-goat ran into the ram in the fury of his power and stamped the ram in the ground. And none could deliver the ram out of the hands of the he-goat. Therefore the he-goat waxed strong. According to verses 7 and 8, the ram was overthrown, the he-goat waxed strong. And when he was strong, the notable horn was broken off, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And verse 9, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the east and toward the south and toward the pleasant land. Then he saw this little horn casting down some of the hosts of the stars of the heavens to the ground, even the prince of the host. And he saw this little horn causing the abomination of desolation. And he saw that this abomination of desolation continued, or rather the transgression of desolation as it is in this 8th chapter, continued for 2,300 evenings and mornings. For this vision is, after all, concerning the evening and the morning sacrifice. For it speaks of the vision of the evening and the morning. Therefore, these 2,300 days are literally 2,300 evenings and mornings.